It's the end of the month, which only means one thing. It's time for another volume of the Cinema Chronicles right here on the Vick's Flicks podcast. I am your host, the resident film critic of Sobros Network, Brandon Vick. I'm a proud member of the Southeastern Film Critics Association and a board member of the Music City Film Critics Association. And we're back, volume 21. We've almost been doing 2 years of this thing. And, listen, time flies, I guess. Time flies. It's been a busy month. I turned 1 year older. Me and the EIC himself, Stoney Keeley, just got done covering the Nashville Film Festival for the 9th year for the Sobros Network, and I think it's the 55th year of the film festival. He's got a couple pieces up there for it. We also did a podcast that kind of goes over, I think it was 15, 16 movies we saw combined, so check those out if you're interested. I'm kind of looking forward to seeing what next year holds, where we'll be covering the thing for a whole 10 years. And I felt a bit foolish because I was doing a little rundown of some of the films that I saw that Stoney didn't, and I literally almost forgot maybe the best one that I saw, called Memoir of a Snail. And so I just thought I'd plug it here too. It's an Australian animated movie. Really well done. Has a very unique look. It's kind of a mixture of like the Tim Burton ones, like A Corpse Bride, and some of the, Lackey? I don't know. The ones that did like Coraline and the Box Trolls and Paranorman. But it's really well done. Sarah Snook from Succession voices main character. Jackie Weaver is in it. Eric Bana is in it. So it's really good. I'm hoping. I think IFC bought it, but I'm kind of hoping it gets more recognition and gets a nomination, because it's one of the best movies I've seen. It's definitely one of the best animated movies I've seen. But yeah, I think a lot of people are like, man, going to see a film festival, all you have to do is watch movies all day. But it's exhausting, and I don't want people to think, oh, come on, you big puss. But let me tell you, before you know it, you're either popcorn is for dinner, or you have to start skipping stuff, even movies you may really want to see, because you can't go from Franklin Theater to Green Hills quick enough. You have to have time to eat. I was kind of laughing, and I'm sure this looked very strange to people who walked by, but at one point over the weekend that the film festival, it was the 19th through the 25th, I think. I was sitting in my car in the dark in a parking garage eating a Lunchable, and I thought, my God, this is, if people only knew the hardships that us film critics have to go through. Every now and then I roll down the window and make bird noises just to feel alive, I guess. So I do a really good seagull, but I can't do it here because I don't want to bust the mics. So, but yeah, I enjoyed it. I was shocked to hear that this was our 9th year covering it as press, and I've been going for 12, 13 years maybe. I remember doing a volunteer thing for a college credit. So, and I actually did an internship in the summer with them. Man, it's been, it's gone through a lot of changes, but this year I was pleasantly surprised. I think I can speak for Stoney and myself that I was pleasantly surprised. So it was nice. And like I said, I look forward to next year, seeing what we can do. But I'm glad that I enjoyed it. But in all honesty, I'm glad it's over, because I kind of want just a normal routine again of kind of being at home or not seeing like 4 movies in one day and then getting home at like 11 o'clock and waking up at 5:30 with my son. So anyway, enough. Hey, listen, don't feel sorry for me. I'm doing just fine. Let's get into it. I got quite a variety for you, for you listeners out there, and we're gonna start with good old James McAvoy and a remake that, well, you know what? It's scary in the sense of like the way The Strangers is, and the fact that this shit could really happen. I'll tell you about it more right after this. The movie is called Speak No Evil, and I'm going to start with the synopsis here, just to kind of give everybody an idea on what this is about in case you haven't seen it. This is per Rotten Tomatoes. When an American family is invited to spend the weekend at the idyllic country estate of a charming British family they befriended on vacation, what begins as a dream holiday soon warps into a snarled psychological nightmare. So this is a remake of a Danish horror film that shares the same name. This one is written for the screen and directed by James Watkins, who he directed The Woman in Black, which, if I'm not mistaken, I think there's a movie review rewind on Sobros Network for that. But the original Speak No Evil was just released like 2 years ago. So my initial thoughts on it being Americanized, as we say, so soon, was that it's going to be a complete and utter mess, and I'm sure it's probably going to lose everything that made the original so horrific and disturbing. But you know what? You know what, folks? I was somewhat wrong. There are obvious changes, which is to be expected, and this includes a big one that we'll get to in a minute. But Watkins does honor the 2022 film while telling his own story about these two families. Via Deadline, Speak No Evil director explains why he remade the 2022 Danish film and what he changed. Watkins says there'll be people that see the original movie and go, why hasn't he remade that movie? Why hasn't he made this incredibly punchy, unrelenting ending? Watkins told SFX magazine. But I would argue with my characters and their journey, I'm following through their journey in terms of agency and how they would react. What I've taken from Christian's film, talking about the Danish one, is the satire, the exploration of the social rules, and how we react. The director also changed one of the original film's most poignant scenes. I've made an incredibly bleak movie before, so I didn't feel I needed to make another one, Watkins explained. You can give people an incredibly tense roller coaster ride that has thematic nourishment and things to take away and talk about in the pub, but it can be fun. People need fun. Fun and inverted commas, added Watkins. I've sat with audiences and people come out of this absolutely rinsed, like you would on a great roller coaster ride. I wanted to make a film that is tense and has people screaming at the screen. The last part of this is referring to the ending, which is indeed very fucking bleak in the Danish version. This American one is a lot more, I would say, digestible and less depressing. At the same time, it isn't nearly as emotionally or mentally effective. Watkins takes the more familiar approach of what I think we expect, especially Americans, expect from all kinds of horror flicks. Yet, I will say it's still some edge-of-your-seat stuff. That's not quite the case throughout the movie, as it's missing some of the thrills, the suspense, and that extreme feeling of just being uncomfortable in some of these key scenes in this American remake. The superb score from the original added so much to how the movie makes you feel, and there's nothing really like that here. The music doesn't really serve a purpose at all in this one. But when Speak No Evil does get tense or thrilling or uncomfortable, it's mostly because of the excellent performance from our boy, James McAvoy. As Patty, McAvoy is equally charming and unhinged. Apparently, he had heard of the 2022 original before signing on to do this, but never saw a trailer or the movie. And apparently, if he had, he may not have taken the role because he wanted to avoid comparing himself to what someone else had already done, which, I think makes total sense for an actor. Watkins relies a lot on him to do the heavy lifting, and he's absolutely up for the challenge. I think similar to his fabulous performance in Split, he can change in a split second, and it's terrifying. There's an Entertainment Weekly interview where McAvoy talks about the physical transformation that his character takes on in the movie. It says that he intentionally tried to make his antagonist less physically intimidating in his earlier scenes before his character's true nature is fully revealed. McAvoy says, I tried to keep him as soft as possible for the beginning of the film when we're on holiday, trying to take the edge off the fact that this is clearly a bad guy coming in here. And then by the end of the movie, doing all that classic shit that actors do, eating slightly less carbs, pumping up before each take, all that kind of stuff, when he's meant to be malevolent and more bestial and animalistic. So, without a doubt, this Speak No Evil would not cut it in being as unnerving as it is without him. But the rest of the cast is pretty good. I think Mackenzie Davis is the standout there. She's taken the reins in this remake as our heroine, who's willing to put up a fight. I don't blame Watkins for changing that up, as the movie is certainly about toxic masculinity, but it's not just about that. Relationships, family, society, politeness. Watkins fits it all in, with some resonating stronger than others. It's as I've talked about this, it's difficult not to compare the two Speak No Evils, but I got to say, whether you've seen the 2022 original or not, which if you haven't, I highly recommend it. It's on Shudder. A lot of what Watkins goes with works to some degree, even if that true sense of dread never really comes. One thing that really benefits this version, I think, is humor, something that the original one does not have. Adding some laughs, I think, does this story some good. And in the end, while diluted, I think there's still that sinister smell is still very much in the air. So, Speak No Evil is getting 3 out of 5. Vick's Flicks rating. And coming up next, a new Transformers movie. Do what? I hope Mark Wahlberg's in it. So Transformers is back, but this time it is an animated movie called Transformers 1. Per Rotten Tomatoes, it is the untold origin story of Optimus Prime and Megatron, better known as sworn enemies, but once were friends, bonded like brothers, who changed the fate of Cybertron forever. I was aware that there was an animated movie back in the 80s, and researching for this volume, I found out it was actually in 1986, and I don't know what month, so it's quite possible I wasn't even born yet. But there is a Variety article where the director, Josh Cooley, talks about the original animated film. It says, for at least one generation of Transformers fans, the death of Optimus Prime in the 1986 animated feature, The Transformers the Movie, was a formative movie-going experience, if not a fully traumatic one. The backlash to Hasbro's decision to kill off the Autobot leader to make room for new toys was so swift and loud that it largely kept the franchise relegated to kids' entertainment until Michael Bay forced it to grow up, to adolescence anyway, with his series of live-action movies. It says, with the release of Transformers 1, director Cooley hopes to find a middle ground between the animated series' childish adventures and Bay's sophomoric hijinks. It says, how much, if at all, did the Transformers the movie factor into your approach to Transformers 1? Cooley says, when I was 7 years old, I saw it in the theater at a friend's birthday party, and we were all kind of shocked at Hasbro attempting to wipe the slate clean and create new characters. I went back and watched it before I started on this film, and the feeling I remembered from seeing it in the theater was just the scale of it was massive. There were Unicron coming in and just taking out the planet. Even Star Wars at the time never felt that big. That was the thing that I wanted for this film, because we don't have the human scale to relate to. I wanted to go the opposite direction. So instead of the robots feeling big, it's the worlds around them that's big. Cybertron itself. So I gotta say, more than meets the eye indeed. Transformers 1 is funny, it's fun, it's engrossing and energetic. Cooley, who directed Toy Story 4 and co-wrote Inside Out, capitalizes on some phenomenal CGI animation to explore the themes of friendship and power and betrayal and freedom in an origin story well worth telling. Chris Hemsworth, Brian Tyree Henry, and Scarlett Johansson lead a stellar voice cast with, I have to add, a scene-stealing Keegan-Michael Key as B. He's hilarious. This is sure, I think, to satisfy longtime fans and young newcomers alike, as, honestly, I don't think Transformers has been this entertaining nor this exciting in a very long time. Via comic book resources, Transformers 1 producer clarifies the prequel's connection to live-action movies. So this is, if anybody's curious as to where maybe, or if this even falls into what Michael Bay's directed and produced over the years, the producer was speaking to comicbook.com, and he had responded to questions of whether the film stands as a proper prequel to the live-action Transformers films, which have been steadily released since 2007. He said, I think it'd be really hard and complicated to have a direct link. By the way, this producer has been a part of these ongoing Transformers feature film franchise from the beginning. And he praises Cooley's work on Transformers 1, even going so far as to note that the film will have an impact on future live-action releases in the series. It won't be necessarily literally a character or an event, but it has an effect on what we're going to do. If it was up to me, personally, this is film critic Brendan Vick talking now. If it was up to me, I would ditch these live-action ones and just roll with movies like Transformers 1. It is right up there with the first Transformers and Bumblebee as being the best of the best. Animated is clearly the only way forward for this franchise. It reinvigorates our love for these awesome Autobots. So my VixFlix rating for Transformers 1 is a solid 4 out of 5, one of the best movies of the year. You can be 40, you can be 4, you'll love it all the same. Highly recommend going to see it. And coming up next, we are going to visit a Kate Winslet film. Well, I wonder who's going to draw her boobies. What? Oh, I love pulling out so many Titanic references. Just in case you didn't get that, just so we're clear, no one draws Kate Winslet's boobies in these, but you do see them. I'm just throwing that out there for you pervs. So this is called Lee, and it is, per IMDb, the story of American photographer Lee Miller, a fashion model who became an acclaimed war correspondent for Vogue magazine during World War II. So I want to start with a quote that said, a quote from Lee that says, "I'd rather take a picture than be one. I personally didn't know much about Lee, except I knew she was like this pioneering war photojournalist correspondent that reported from the battlefield, where women, at that time were certainly not allowed. So I went on to WikiLeaks, and it says she was an American photographer, photojournalist. She was a fashion model in New York City in the 1920s before going to Paris, becoming a fashion and fine art photographer. But during World War II, she was a war correspondent for Vogue, covering events such as the London Blitz, the liberation of Paris, and the concentration camps that were at Buchenwald and, I hope I'm saying this right, Dachau. Her reputation as an artist in her own right is due mostly to her son's discovery and promotion of her work as a fashion and war photographer. It goes on to say throughout her life, Miller actually did very little to promote her work. Her work is mainly known today because of the efforts of her son, Anthony, who has been studying, conserving, and promoting his mother's work since the early 1980s. He discovered 60,000 or so photographs, negatives, documents, journals, cameras, love letters, and souvenirs in cardboard boxes and trunks in Farley Farm's attic after his mother's death. So Lee, the film, is riveting at some parts and uncertain and meandering at others. But I will say Kate Winslet is excellent, as always, conveying the fierce, though complicated Lee and her absolute need to share the truths of World War II, no matter the cost, and she undoubtedly paid a heavy price. This is per The Guardian. Kate Winslet insisted her film about Lee Miller must have a female director. So Kate Winslet, who's also a co-producer on Lee, she said she wanted to portray American Miller as a truth seeker and a truth teller. She felt that Miller brought a particular sensitivity when she reported on the Battle of St. Malo in the Second World War, field hospitals in Normandy, and the concentration camps. And I must say, and a lot of this is attempted to be presented in the film, but it is to rather mixed success. Obviously, its main focus is about her World War II work, which is her true legacy. But Winslet's stellar portrayal is surrounded by a disappointingly run-of-the-mill biopic that hardly challenges the audience in actually feeling her experience and the hardships that came with it. I think for such a woman of her stature and all she endured, Lee should have felt more convincing and more moving. This is the continued Guardian article, which again the subject was dealing with a female director. Winslet insisted that and when she plays the fearless photojournalist Lee Miller, must have a female director. Winslet offered the opportunity to direct the film to Ellen Kuras, who actually worked as the cinematographer on films like Eternal Sunshine and A Little Chaos, alongside with Kate Winslet. Lee is Kuras's feature debut. She also had directed a documentary called The Betrayal, which was a 2008 documentary about refugees, which won an Emmy. But Kuras told The Observer that potential investors have been patronizing in their dismissal of Lee as a woman's story, asking, why would you want to make a story about her? Kuras said that previous attempts to make a film about Miller had tended to be more from a male perspective, showing her as a, quote, damaged woman, unquote, rather than understanding the toll that the war took on her. Kuras and Winslet's focus on the toll that is mentioned in the article that this takes on Lee is what serves the story best. In that same Guardian piece, Kuras says that her film portrays a woman who threw herself into the heart of darkness. And that clearly couldn't be more true. And it's impossible to capture what she did and not be affected by it for the rest of her life. And I will say, Kuras does give us a good glimpse into that, though it's all still too simplistic. Though Curtis does show some very striking images throughout, which are inarguably effective, but I mean, she is a cinematographer after all, so that's almost to be expected. But it certainly adds to the feel of this film, and at least the world that that Lee was again had thrown herself into the heart of darkness. Towards the end of the film, there is a famous Hitler bathtub picture, which, funny enough, wasn't actually taken by her, but was taken by David E. Sherman. He was a Life photographer for Life magazine, and he's played by Andy Samberg in this, who may surprise some since he does go like full dramatic here, but I think he does a fine job with the role. But this is per Art in America, where it has photographer Lee Miller's subversive career took her from Vogue to war-torn Germany. This is dealing with this famous picture. Miller and Sherman found themselves in Hitler's Munich apartment, which had just been raided by U.S. soldiers, and that was where they produced their famed bathtub picture. Unbeknownst to them at the time, that day would later go down in history as the one that Hitler committed suicide. It was published in Vogue along with an image of a similar one of Sherman in the bath that has actually been long forgotten. For Sherman, he says, the scene shown in the photo, a soiled bath mat flanked by a propaganda portrait of the dictator on the tub's edge, represented the last of the Hitler myth. Lee Miller's life seems so fascinating, and the fact that her World War II work was just a chapter of it is pretty unbelievable. The film covers it in a basic way, but at least Curtis is getting the message out there about Lee and the horrors of what war can bring. And Winslet does all she can to put respect on Lee's name. But in the end, I think a documentary probably would be more beneficial. So Lee is getting a VixFlix rating of 2.5 out of 5, and I believe it just opened in theaters this past Friday. So if you're wanting to check it out, again, you're at least going to get another fantastic Winslet performance. So when we come back, I'm going to wrap this thing up with a couple of sexy wolves. How? Dun, 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 dun. Per Rotten Tomatoes, global superstars George Clooney and Brad Pitt team up for the action comedy Wolves. Clooney plays a professional fixer hired to cover up a high-profile crime. But when a second fixer, played by Brad Pitt, shows up and the two lone wolves are forced to work together, they find their night spiraling out of control in ways that neither one of them expected. Besides George Clooney and Brad Pitt, Austin Abrams, Amy Ryan, Richard Kind, they're all in this as well. Do you know when the last time that George Clooney and Brad Pitt teamed up on screen? I bet people are thinking, probably the last Ocean's movie, Ocean's 13. Nope. It was actually in the very underrated but hilarious Coen Brothers film, Burn After Reading. And that, my friends, was over 15 years ago. Clooney and Pitt have all of the charisma, charm, chemistry, and cool we can handle. And thank goodness, because the story alone from writer-director John Watts is not up to snuff. It's a half-baked, bland, and derivative fixer flick that luckily zips by because of its two handsome pros. But I assure you, without them, Wolves is instantly forgettable. It's really, I'm not really surprised by it, and I had read some early reactions when it premiered in Venice that it's basically the Clooney and Pitt show. I mean, that's what this movie is, and it gets by on that. I think it could have been better. I think the guys deserve better since it has been over 15 years. But at least when you get to superstars like this is in one movie, they won't let you down. Austin Abrams, I talked about earlier, he is actually shockingly able to hang in there and is quite funny with Clooney and Pitt. He is from two shows I've never watched, but I think the rest of the world has, The Walking Dead and Euphoria. But I was actually really impressed with how he came across on scene. And honestly, I mean, when you're in a scene with Brad Pitt and George Clooney, you got to stand out somehow. And he actually did with the role that he had. And he really plays a big role. He's really kind of the piece to this kind of murder mystery that is unfolding right from the beginning of the movie. But I thought he did a great job playing the role, and like I said, fitting in quite well with two legends. I don't quite remember the story itself, but basically Wolves was supposed to get a full theatrical release last week. It was supposed to roll out on September 20th. And then somewhere along the line, Apple TV scrapped that. And they did two things at the same time, which I thought was fascinating, is they limited the theatrical release to just 1 week, and it started streaming on Apple TV as of last Friday, the 27th. But within that same announcement, they had already greenlit a sequel to Wolves. So, I don't know. It seems a bit strange, but there is a sequel already in the works, and after seeing this, you know what? I'm cool with it. I know what I'll be in for, and there's worse ways to spend an evening than watching Clooney and Pitt's bromance wash over you. And so this one's short and sweet, folks. That's it. Wolves, Vick's Flicks rating of 3 out of 5. And that wraps up volume 21 of the Cinema Chronicles right here on the Vick's Flicks podcast. Again, I am your host, Brandon Vick. You can follow me on Twitter at Sir Brandon V, and you can follow me at Sir Brandon on Letterboxd if you have it. Be sure to check out all of our work at SoBrosNetwork.com. I talked about how we've got some stuff dealing with the Nashville Film Festival that we just wrapped up. I got a Vick's Flicks special edition on Beetlejuice that's up there, so check that stuff out. And subscribe to the Vick's Flicks podcast on Apple Podcasts. You can follow us on Spotify or wherever you take in your shows. Give us a rating and a review whenever you have a moment. That's how we get better, and we always want to be better for you guys. Until next month, which I believe would make it a Halloween episode, just go see a damn movie. Ugh.